It was a crisp summer morning in Cedarbrook, the kind of morning that makes you feel alive just by breathing in the air. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the towering pine trees that surrounded my small hometown. For me, 28-year-old, it was the perfect day to embark on an adventure into the wilderness. I've always been drawn to nature. Growing up in Cedarbrook, I spent countless hours exploring the forests, climbing mountains, and swimming in crystal-clear lakes. My love for the outdoors only grew stronger as I got older. Whenever life felt overwhelming, the woods became my sanctuary, a place where I could be free from the constraints of society and simply exist in my truest form. Today, I had a special plan in mind. I discovered a secluded spot deep in the woods near Cedarbrook, and I was eager to capture its beauty in a way that felt deeply personal. The location was perfect, a serene meadow surrounded by dense forest, with a breathtaking view of the mountains in the distance. It was the kind of place where I felt truly at peace. I packed my gear carefully, making sure I had everything I needed for the day's adventure. My camera, tripod, and a circular mirror I planned to use for the shoot were all securely stowed in my backpack. I also packed a lightweight robe and a towel, just in case I needed to cover up quickly. I was always mindful of my surroundings and made sure to choose locations that were far away from popular hiking trails or busy areas. The hike to the meadow was about 1.5 miles, and I set off with a spring in my step. The trail was narrow and winding, with patches of wildflowers lining the path. The air was filled with the sweet scent of pine, and the only sounds were the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. I felt a sense of calm wash over me as I walked, my mind focused on the experience that lay ahead. As I approached the meadow, my excitement grew. The field was even more beautiful than I had imagined, a lush expanse of green grass dotted with colorful wildflowers. The trees surrounding the meadow provided a natural barrier, creating a sense of privacy and seclusion. I knew I had found the perfect spot. I spent the next 20 minutes setting up my equipment. I positioned my camera on the tripod, carefully adjusting the angle to capture the best possible shots. I placed the circular mirror on the ground, experimenting with different positions to achieve the desired effect. The mirror would reflect the sky above, creating a unique and artistic composition that would showcase both my body and the natural beauty of the surroundings. Once everything was set up, I took a deep breath and began to undress. I folded my clothes neatly and placed them on a nearby rock, then stood in the center of the meadow, feeling the cool breeze against my skin. I closed my eyes for a moment, savoring the sensation of being completely free and connected to nature. I began to pose, moving gracefully as I experimented with different angles and compositions. I was in my element, completely absorbed in the creative process. The camera clicked away, capturing every moment as I lost myself in the beauty of the meadow and the joy of self-expression. I'd been posing for about 5 minutes when I heard a loud crunch to my left. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze in place. The sound was unmistakable. It was the sound of footsteps. My mind raced as I tried to process what was happening. I had chosen this spot specifically because it was secluded, and I hadn't seen another soul on the trail. I turned my head slowly, my eyes scanning the trees for any sign of movement. And then I saw him, a man, about 40 years old, standing about 15 feet away. He was holding a walking stick and looked just as surprised as I felt. For a moment, we simply stared at each other in stunned silence. My mind went into overdrive. I was completely naked, standing in the middle of a meadow with a camera and a mirror set up for a photo shoot. There was no way to explain the situation without it sounding incredibly awkward. A wave of embarrassment crashed over me, and my face burned hot. I didn't think anyone would be out here, I stammered, grabbing my robe and clutching it to my chest but too frozen in place to put it on. The man blinked a few times, as if trying to process what he was seeing. Then, To my absolute astonishment, he let out a chuckle. Not a mocking laugh, but a genuine, amused chuckle. "Well," he said, shifting his weight to one side, "I guess I wasn't expecting to stumble upon an art project today." I hesitated, still feeling exposed despite the robe in my hands. I started, then sighed. It's a personal project." He nodded, glancing around the meadow. "Nice spot for it. You've got an eye for scenery." I finally managed to slip the robe on, tying it tightly around my waist. The initial shock of the encounter had worn off, but I was still mortified. I could feel my pulse in my ears, and a nervous laugh escaped my lips. "I guess I should have put up a sign or something." The man smirked. "No worries. I was just passing through. Didn't mean to startle you." There was an awkward pause. I wasn't sure whether to apologize, explain myself further, or just let the moment pass. He seemed to sense my discomfort and took a step back. "I'll leave you to it," he said with an easy nod. "Enjoy the rest of your day." As he turned and disappeared into the trees, I exhaled heavily, my heart still hammering. The interaction had been brief, but it left me rattled. I had expected to feel embarrassment, and I did. But there was also something else, something more complicated. The way he had handled the situation with casual acceptance, even a hint of admiration, left me with an unexpected mix of emotions. For the rest of the shoot, I couldn't quite get back into the same flow. Every time I closed my eyes to focus, my mind wandered back to that moment, to the way he had looked at me, not with judgment, but with curiosity and understanding. And that, more than anything, made me question myself. Why did I feel this strange thrill at being seen? Why did his reaction matter so much to me? And why, despite my initial embarrassment, did part of me wish I had said something more? After the man disappeared into the forest, I stood there for a few moments longer than necessary, trying to process what had just happened. The meadow, which had felt like my sanctuary only minutes before, now seemed charged with an energy I couldn't quite place. It wasn't fear or anger. It was something else entirely, a mix of vulnerability and exhilaration that left me unsettled yet oddly intrigued. I glanced down at my camera, still perched on its tripod, waiting patiently for me to resume the shoot. But my focus was shattered. Every time I tried to position myself in front of the lens, my thoughts drifted back to the stranger's amused expression, his calm demeanor, and the way he hadn't judged me outright. Instead, he'd acknowledged my presence with a quiet respect, almost as if he understood the importance of the moment I was attempting to capture. The mirror lay untouched where I'd left it, reflecting the sky above, but also reminding me of how exposed I'd been. For years, I'd used photography as a form of self-expression, a way to connect with nature and explore my identity outside the confines of societal expectations. Being naked in the wilderness wasn't about rebellion. It was about freedom, about shedding layers, both literal and metaphorical, to feel truly alive. Yet, until today, I'd always done so in solitude, confident that no one would stumble upon me. Now, having been seen, I realized how much I craved not just privacy but validation. His reaction had stirred something deep within me, forcing me to confront why I sought these moments of raw authenticity in the first place. Eventually, I forced myself to continue. I adjusted the camera settings, took a deep breath, and stepped back into the frame. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the meadow. The light danced through the trees, creating patterns on the ground that shifted with every passing breeze. Despite my lingering unease, I found solace in the beauty surrounding me. Slowly, I began to move again, letting the rhythm of the wind guide my poses. But this time, something was different. My movements felt less inhibited, more fluid. Perhaps it was because I knew someone else had witnessed my vulnerability, Or maybe it was because I'd started to embrace it. Whatever the reason, I felt more connected to the environment than ever before. Each click of the shutter captured not just my body against the backdrop of nature, but also the emotions swirling inside me. Uncertainty, curiosity, liberation. When the session finally came to an end, I packed up my gear with a sense of accomplishment mixed with lingering introspection. As I retraced my steps along the trail, I replayed the encounter in my mind over and over. Who was that man? What was he doing out here alone? And why did his brief appearance leave such a lasting impression? By the time I returned home, the day's events weighed heavily on my thoughts. I uploaded the photos to my computer, scrolling through them with a critical eye. Some were stunning. The way the sunlight filtered through the trees, the reflection of the sky in the mirror. But others felt incomplete, as though they lacked the emotional depth I'd hoped to convey. Still, there was one image that stood out. In it, I was mid-motion, arms stretched toward the sky, my face turned upward as if reaching for something intangible. The composition was perfect, but it was the expression on my face that caught my attention. There was a vulnerability there, a rawness that mirrored exactly how I'd felt when the stranger appeared. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept returning to the man in the woods. Was he local? Had he come from Cedarbrook, or was he simply passing through? More importantly, what had he thought of me after leaving the meadow? Did he see me as reckless, brave, or something in between? These questions gnawed at me, keeping me awake long after the rest of the house had fallen silent. The next morning, I decided to revisit the meadow, not to take more photos, but to see if I could find any trace of him. It was a foolish idea, I knew, but I couldn't shake the feeling that our paths crossing had been significant somehow. Maybe I wanted answers, or maybe I just needed closure. Either way, I packed a small bag with water and snacks and set off once again. As I approached the meadow, I scanned the area for signs of recent activity. The ground was soft, and footprints were easy to spot, but none matched the distinct tread pattern of hiking boots I remembered seeing yesterday. Disappointed but unsurprised, I sat down on a rock near the edge of the clearing and gazed out at the mountains in the distance. The view was breathtaking, as always, but it didn't hold the same magic without the mystery of the unknown. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed something glinting in the grass nearby. Curious, I walked over and picked it up. It was a small brass compass, worn but functional. Engraved on the back were the initials JM. A surge of excitement coursed through me. Could this belong to the man I'd encountered? If so, it meant he'd been here recently, and perhaps even planned to return. Over the next few days, I became obsessed with finding him. I asked around town, describing the man to anyone who would listen. Most people shrugged, saying they hadn't seen anyone matching his description. But then, late one afternoon, I stopped by the local cafe and struck up a conversation with an elderly woman named Margaret, who often hiked the trails herself. "Oh, you mean James," she said, her eyes lighting up. "He's a regular around here. Comes in every couple of weeks to stock up on supplies. Quiet guy, keeps to himself mostly. Lives in a cabin up north." My heart raced. "Do you know where exactly?" She nodded and gave me directions, warning me that the road leading to his cabin was rough and best suited for four-wheel drive. Undeterred, I thanked her and headed straight for my car. The drive took nearly 2 hours, winding through dense forests and along narrow dirt roads. When I finally arrived at the cabin, it was smaller than I expected, nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and a wooden sign hanging above the door read JM in faded letters. I hesitated before knocking, suddenly unsure of what I would say. What if he didn't remember me? Or worse, what if he did and thought I was crazy for showing up unannounced? Before I could talk myself out of it, the door creaked open, revealing the same man from the meadow. "Well," he said, raising an eyebrow, This is unexpected. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, holding out the compass, I said, I think you dropped this. He looked at it, then back at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. So you're the artist, he said. Come on in. And just like that, the story began anew.